Open your fridge and find the thing you bought with good intentions and won't eat. That wasn't a cooking failure, it was a shopping decision made too early. Japan loses around 4.6 million tons of edible food a year, roughly one rice ball per person per day, in the country that gave us mottainai. So this isn't about virtue. It's 10 rules that stop the mistake before food reaches your fridge. The first costs nothing and can cut this week's bill. It starts with the hour you shop. Late in the afternoon, somebody walks the aisles of a supermarket with a label gun. Stickers go onto the sliced fish, the prepared food, the meat that has to move today. In Japanese supermarkets, this is a well-established rhythm, and there are shoppers who plan around it. Most supermarkets, in most countries, do a version of this. Very few shoppers know their own store's timing, because it isn't announced anywhere. It's simply applied by a member of staff at an hour that tends to repeat. So find out when yours starts. Ask at the counter, or watch the pattern over a few visits. Schedules vary by store and by day, and some staff will tell you while others won't, so treat it as something to observe rather than be told. It helps to know what gets marked down. Discounts land on things with a same-day clock. Prepared food, cut fruit, bakery, fish, meat near its date. They rarely touch tins, dry goods, or frozen items, which aren't racing a deadline. This is a rule about the fresh half of the basket, which is where most of the money leaks. The trade-off is one sentence long, less choice, and no guarantee the thing you wanted will be there. Markdown food works best when you're buying for the next meal rather than predicting an entire week, which is the second rule. You are buying for a future version of yourself whose energy and schedule you cannot accurately predict. That's the flaw in the weekly shop, and it isn't a discipline problem. On Sunday you plan for the person who gets home at 8 on Thursday. Sunday you is rested and ambitious. Thursday you is tired and orders in. The food doesn't fail, the forecast does. There's a figure behind this worth knowing. In the ministry's breakdown of Japanese household food loss for the previous fiscal year, roughly 40% was food disposed of directly, rather than leftovers from a meal that was actually cooked. Food that was bought and then never reached at all. In walkable Japanese cities, frequent smaller trips are a familiar pattern. On foot, on the way home, for the next day or two. You don't have to copy the frequency to use the principle. Split the basket by how fast it dies. Shelf-stable groceries can be bought as infrequently as you like. The perishable part, the fresh vegetables, the fish, the leaves, should be bought as close as you can manage to when you'll eat it. If you live rurally, have limited transport, or are shopping with small children in the car, more trips is not useful advice. In that case, apply this to the perishable half only, and let everything else ride on the weekly run. Now look at how much of each thing you're allowed to buy. A Japanese supermarket will sell you half a cabbage, wrapped and priced, part of a daikon, a small tray with 3 mushrooms in it, a single carrot, portion sized for a meal or two, rather than for a household of 5. Many supermarkets elsewhere push in the opposite direction. Bags, bundles, multi-packs, and a unit price that rewards you for taking more. And a lower unit price saves nothing if the unused portion is discarded. Buying a kilo of carrots to save 40 cents, using 2, and composting the rest is not a saving. It's a slightly cheaper way of buying 2 carrots. 3 applications, and no more than 3. Choose loose produce when the shop offers it. Ask a butcher or fish counter for the quantity you actually want, because most will weigh out what you ask for. And keep buying genuinely shelf-stable staples in larger quantities, because those don't spoil while you decide. There is one situation where buying more of something is exactly right, and the 7th rule is where that lives. What's abundant in your supermarket this week? Most people can't say, because they arrive with a list written at home and work through it regardless of what the shop has that day. The list was made in a kitchen. The food is in the store. The Japanese term is shun, the short window when something is at its seasonal peak rather than merely available. And produce at its peak tends to be plentiful, which tends to make it cheaper, which is why it's usually the thing piled high near the entrance. But don't walk in with no plan at all, because an unplanned shop is how impulse buying happens. Do this instead. Keep the stable part of your list exactly as it is, and leave 1 or 2 fresh slots deliberately undecided. Fill those slots from whatever is abundant and well-priced when you get there. Spotting it takes seconds once you know the signs. Abundance looks like volume and position, stacked in a pile rather than arranged in a row, at the front of the section rather than the back, often loose rather than pre-packed. When a shop has too much of something, it puts it where you'll trip over it. The main ingredient chooses itself, and the meal follows from it, which is a much smaller decision than starting from nothing. This will sound incompatible with buying the same groceries every week. The eighth rule is where that resolves. Open your fridge door and count the bottles standing in it. Sauces, dressings, marinades, 2 kinds of mustard, something bought for one recipe that didn't work out. Each solved exactly one meal, and each is still there. Before buying another specialized sauce, it's worth building one flavor base that works across several meals instead. A common Japanese approach is dashi, a light stock made from kombu seaweed and dried bonito flakes, which sits underneath soup, simmered vegetables, noodle broth, and braises. For a vegetarian version, kombu with dried shiitake is a standard method rather than a substitute. You don't have to cook Japanese food to use the principle. The base might be a stock you make from bones or trimmings, a tomato base, a herb mixture, or one spice blend you actually like. What matters is that flavor comes from something versatile you keep, rather than from a new bottle bought to solve each individual dinner. The shopping consequence is direct. The door of your fridge stops filling up, because you've stopped outsourcing every meal's flavor to a purchase. If you make a base at home, refrigerate it properly, and use it within a sensible window rather than letting it sit. The hardest part of weekday cooking is usually not the cooking. It's deciding what the meal should be. That question arrives every evening at the precise hour you have the least capacity to answer it, and answering it badly is what sends people to the takeaway app. A traditional Japanese structure called ichiju sansai, 1 soup, 3 dishes, solves this by not asking the question at all. Rice, a soup, a main, and 2 small sides. It's a template, and the template does the deciding. The universal version is 4 slots, 1 staple, 1 main component, 1 soup or warm liquid element, 1 or 2 small sides. It doesn't have to be Japanese. The staple is bread or potatoes or pasta. The main is a piece of fish or a tray of roasted vegetables. And the small sides are less cooking than assembling. A tomato with salt and oil, a boiled egg, something from a jar. What the template really removes is the moment of collapse. Ordering in is rarely a decision to eat something specific. It's usually surrender to an open question. 4 slots turn that open question into a much narrower one. What goes in the main slot tonight? And you already answered that at the shop. Notice how the earlier rules feed it. The seasonal ingredient becomes the main. The flavor base becomes the soup. The stable part of your list supplies the staple. And the sides come from the next rule. 2 containers in the fridge. Made on a Sunday. Change what Wednesday feels like. Tsukurioki is the Japanese practice of preparing a few small components in advance, so that assembling a meal later takes minutes instead of an evening. 2 examples are enough: a batch of greens blanched and dressed, and a jar of quick pickled vegetables or marinated eggs. Here's where the third rule gets its exception. Buy more of 1 or 2 ingredients that you have deliberately scheduled to process, rather than small amounts of 5 things for 5 imaginary recipes. Small quantities are for the fresh variety you're eating in the next day or 2. Larger quantities are for the one thing you're going to cook down or pickle on the day you buy it. Whether it enters the fridge raw or finished is what decides which rule applies. In practice, this is smaller than it sounds. It isn't batch cooking 6 dinners into identical plastic tubs. It's 20 minutes on the day you shop, while you're unpacking anyway. A pot of water for the greens, a jar and some vinegar for the pickle. Neither is a recipe you'd photograph, and that's what makes them survivable. And it changes the question you ask in front of the vegetables. Not what am I cooking this week, but which one thing am I processing today? That's a single decision instead of 5, and it's the only purchase where more is the right answer. Cool. Anything you've prepared properly before it goes in, and follow reliable local guidance on how long to keep it, rather than guessing. Buy roughly the same things most weeks. This is the rule that sounds like bad advice, and it's the one that resolves the tension from the 4th. The repeated part of the basket is the core. The seasonal part is the variable. They aren't competing, because they were never the same half of the shop. The 4th rule governs 1 or 2 fresh slots. This one governs everything underneath them. A stable core buys you something people underestimate: calibration. If you buy spinach most weeks, you learn within a bunch or 2 how much your household actually gets through before it turns. How many eggs disappear, how fast the bread goes. If you buy a different green every week, you never build that knowledge, so every purchase is a guess, and guesses run high, because few people are willing to run short. Constant novelty prevents you from learning your household's real consumption rate. A common home cooking system, in Japan and elsewhere, is a relatively stable rotation with seasonal substitutions inside it. That's a rotation, not a rut. A stable core is about repetition in the shop, not a nutritionally narrow diet. Look in your bin tonight. Broccoli stems, the leafy green tops of a daikon or a bunch of radishes, the kombu that already made your dashi. Mottainai is the idea that something shouldn't be discarded while it still has use in it. Broccoli stems are sweeter than the florets once the tough skin is off. Radish and daikon leaves are cooked with sesame and eaten over rice. Used kombu can be simmered with soy sauce into tsukurioki, a small dish made entirely from something most people throw out. The shopping connection is the point. Using more of what you already bought reduces how quickly another vegetable has to replace it. Put differently, throwing away the usable half means paying twice, once for the vegetable, and again for the vegetable you buy to replace the part you binned. A bunch of radishes bought for the radishes is roughly half a bunch. Bought for both, it's 2 ingredients at one price. The same logic applies at the other end of the meal. The stems and trimmings you can't face eating directly are the beginning of a stock, which is the flavor base from the 5th rule arriving free. But not every part of every plant is edible, and this is one place to be careful rather than adventurous. Green or sprouting potatoes and rhubarb leaves should not be eaten. If it's a part you've never cooked, check a reliable food safety source first. So here is the actual basket, in 2 parts. The fixed core barely changes, and you don't decide about it. A staple, rice, bread, pasta, whatever yours is, eggs, or another protein you eat regularly. The flavor base from the 5th rule. 1 pickled or preserved thing, cooking oil. The handful of pantry items you genuinely use. This gets replaced when it runs out, not chosen. The variable is small, 1 or 2 fresh vegetables, a seasonal fruit, perhaps 1 markdown item you'll eat within a day. In practice, a week looks like this. The core is already in the cupboard, so you're not shopping for it, you're topping it up when something runs low. At the shop, you check the markdown shelf, look at what's piled high, and pick 1 or 2 fresh things. One of them you'll process that afternoon into a side dish. The rest gets eaten inside 3 days, and by then you're back. That's the whole system. You do not need to invent an entire week of meals. You maintain the core, and you make 1 small fresh decision based on what's good today. It is boring by design, and it should be said plainly rather than dressed up. The predictability is the mechanism. It's what removes the decisions. If cooking is your creative outlet, that doesn't have to be a loss. Save the experimenting for the meals you genuinely enjoy planning, and let the system carry the exhausted Tuesday evenings that were never going to be creative anyway. 3 ideas hold all 10 together. Decide as close as you can to the moment you'll eat, because every extra day is a day of optimism you'll pay for later. Structure does what willpower doesn't, which is why a template and a fixed core outlast resolutions. And use more of what's already in the bag, because a good deal of what gets thrown away was never cooked at all. If you take one thing, take the first. Find out when your supermarket marks down fresh food. It costs nothing, and it works this week. Which of the 10 is already true in your kitchen? Tell me in the comments. And once the shopping changes, the next question is, what deserves permanent space in the cupboard?